A pretty awful year in 2024 has led to a complete cleaning house of the coaching staff in Jacksonville. You have new head coach Liam Cohen coming over from Tampa Bay, new offensive coordinator Grant Udinski, and new defensive coordinator Anthony Campanile. Now, while there has been some memes made of Liam Cohen in his press conferences and just kind of his overall mannerisms since he's become the new head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think there's been a pretty good job in terms of overhauling what I think poor habits and poor mindset was in place with the coaching staff before. I've made videos about it before, and I think it's a pretty common thought about Doug Peterson now that he just isn't that good of a head coach. He's not very good in team building. He's not very good in play calling. He's just not very good, especially in NFL standards. And so I think there's a huge addition by subtraction by getting Doug Peterson out of there. And it is an addition to have Liam Cohen as the head coach of this team. Where you hope to see a major change is in the offense. Last year, the offense was not very good. And it's pretty hard to see when you consider the fact that these are young guys that have shown an ability to, at least statistically, be pretty good on the football field. Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, these guys had their worst years since they came into the NFL. Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby were kind of fighting for that number one running back position, but it also seemed like the head coach, Doug Peterson, and their offensive coordinator last year just didn't really want to give the job to anybody, so they just decided to split it evenly, which is never really the right way to handle that. We saw 7 games of Mac Jones last year due to Trevor Lawrence's injury, and while he played okay, it's not like there's any chance. I mean, the Jaguars have already signed John Wolford to be their backup quarterback this year, and I think that all but signifies that since Mac Jones is a free agency going into this year, he's probably playing somewhere else in 2025. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. had one of the best years of a rookie receiver in NFL history, 87 receptions, over 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. He, alongside second-year tight end Brenton Strange, at least were some bright spots for this offense, where some of the other guys like Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, some of those guys at the wide receiver group were pretty big letdowns for the Jaguars. And even though Evan Ingram had a decent year at tight end, he missed a lot of games. And it really shined the light on Brenton Strange to just step in and be the tight end one for a few weeks. And I think he did a pretty good job. I think even though statistically, too, in the running game, the Jacksonville Jaguars weren't very good, they at least kept defenders off of Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones. They were tied for 7th in sacks allowed. They didn't give up as much pressure as you would think for one of the worst teams in the NFL. And even though Liam Cohen has preached that he wants to improve the offensive and defensive line, I think as far as the offensive line is considered, a lot of these guys come back next year, except for probably Brandon Scherf. And with what they could possibly add in the draft or free agency, you could see this offensive line having a very positive year in 2025. Now, with the defense, it gets a little bit more bleak when you talk about it. You have Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen, who had, solid years. Trayvon Walker in his 3rd year. Josh Hines-Allen, you're paying him a lot of money, and for what he did, it just wasn't... It's not what you're paying him to do for that production. So you hope that improves next year. Where you do see some improvement is with the linebacking group. You have Devin Lloyd and Foye Oluokun over 100 tackles each. They're in the backfield a solid amount. They're getting after the quarterback. They're getting in the passing game. And even beyond Lloyd and Oluokun, you have backups like Chad Muma, like Ventrell Miller, like Yasir Abdullah. You have a lot of guys in that linebacker group, and especially with Anthony Campanile coming over from Green Bay. He was the linebackers coach with Green Bay. I could really see that group shines as one of the best linebacker groups in 2025. Campanile had a great record working with the linebackers in Green Bay. And you can just easily see that this group has a lot of talent, and they just need somebody to put them in the right position. But overall, the defense in 2024, they just didn't do anything very well. The secondary struggled. The defensive line struggled. To get after the quarterback, they struggled. To cause turnovers, they struggled. So I think it's pretty similar to say you switch from the scheme that you had last year with the coaching staff that you had. You bring in this new coaching staff led by Campanelli, and you have a pretty good chance of being a lot better because it's going to be hard to be worse than what they were last year. I did already mention it, but to bring up the free agents that are going to be in 2025 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, there's not a lot of names that you would hate to lose. Brandon Sheriff is going to be a tough loss because I think he is a pretty good offensive guard in the NFL, but he is getting up there in age. He already has like a $14 million dead cap penalty this year, and that's regardless of if he's on the roster or not. If they sign Sheriff, whatever they sign him to is just going to add to the cap hit. So it's probably a pretty good chance that they just let Sheriff go, as well as guys like, Mac Jones, Dearness Johnson. They're just not guys that you're really yearning to hold on to. The only two guys I would really look at and say we want to bring back are Jeremiah Ledbetter and Andre Sisco. Looking at what the roster looks like for Jacksonville in 2025, I think you pretty much run back the same roster with a few additions on each side of the ball, especially with additions to the offensive line and defensive line. You have a lot of players in place. I mean, even in the secondary where they struggled last year, you have Tyson Campbell. You have guys who played a lot last year. The only position I would really say offensively you change up is you add some interior offensive line help. And on the defense, you add some help at safety because as well as Darnell Savage, Andrew Wingard have played in the last few years with whoever they've played with. Savage was with the Packers for a few years. This was his first year in Jacksonville. I think you can add talent at that position. So as far as free agency for the Jaguars in 2025, there's only a couple of goals I think should really be looked after. Improving the interior of the offensive line, namely replacing Brandon Sheriff. I think you have your tackle position handled with Walker Little at the left side and Anton Harrison on the right side. Two young guys that you want to develop for, you have them contractually tied to your team for a long time. And especially with Anton Harrison, he's a pretty cheap right tackle. And he's decent. He's pretty good. But you just don't have somebody at guard outside of Ezra Cleveland or Dennis Daly, really, that can step in and play. And that's why you want to get somebody like maybe Ben Bredeson from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That would make a lot of sense. He was with Liam Cohen last year in Tampa Bay. Or somebody like Greg Van Roten, who last year, at least, the New York Giants weren't great on the offensive line last year, but Greg Van Roten is a veteran. He's someone that played all of the snaps last year for the Giants, and he could be a consistent force for the offensive line. Now, for the defense, I think some presence along the defensive line would really be necessary for this team's success. I would start with re-signing Jeremiah Ledbetter. I would add somebody like Sheldon Rankins. Guys like Morgan Fox and Joseph Asai would be good too. And then you look at the cornerback group. The guys currently on the roster played a lot of football last year, but they still could use an addition that adds talent and adds depth. You look at guys like DJ Reed and Byron Murphy at the corner spots. And then the secondary, at the safety position, I guess I should say, somebody like Javon Holland, somebody like Jeremy Chin or Justin Reed, I think that would be a really good addition. Like I already said before, I would try to bring back Andre Sisco. But even if they bring back Sisco, I don't know how comfortable I feel with just Sisco, just Darnell Savage in that back end of the secondary. Andrew Wingard is a solid rotational piece, I guess, but I would also be fine with replacing his snaps with someone more talented and someone who's proven to be a better player. And like I already said, Javon Holland, Jeremy Chin, or Justin Reed would be those guys that could add the talent and add experience. Now for the draft, in the first round, the Jacksonville Jaguars have the number 5 pick. They have a lot of selections in total in this year's draft. They have 10 selections. And in the first round, I think there's really no need to try to force another receiver onto this team. And so I think it will be between the O-line and D-line here. There's a lot of talk about Mason Graham on the defensive line, but I think it would make more sense to add Will Campbell. Those first 4 teams ahead of them are probably not going offensive linemen. They're probably going to take the group of Abdul Carter, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, and Travis Hunter. You could even see Will Johnson sneak into that top 4 at New England at the number 4 spot if Travis Hunter is gone. So I think you have your selection of beefing up either the offensive or defensive line. I think it makes more sense to get the offensive line figured out. The defensive line, I think I would rather try to figure out through free agency with just a better, more proven players, especially when you have guys like Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker around them. I think you figure it out more through free agency. With that being said, I wouldn't be surprised or really think much of if they tried to trade back. And especially if that plan, if in free agency they aren't able to bring back Andre Sisco or they aren't able to get somebody else alongside Darnell Savage at a minimum, if they trade back to the 10 to 12 range and they get somebody like Malachi Starks to be their safety of the future, I think that's a pretty good plan. With the 36th pick, I guess if they trade back, I could see an offensive lineman, somebody like a Josh Connerly, maybe Gray Zabel, Donovan Jackson, somebody that helps. But I'm more revolving the plan around getting Will Campbell in the first round. And I think once you do that, then you move to more depth pieces and talented players and the defensive line. I think you look really hard at one of the 3 defensive linemen from Ohio State, whether it's JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, or Tyleik Williams. If it's not there, there's a lot of really talented defensive linemen in the 2nd to 3rd round of this draft. And then further on, I think you help out your secondary. And I think you also look at maybe getting a bruiser running back, someone like a Cam Scatabo, someone like an Ollie Gordon, I think would really help. I think a lot of what's going to add to this team is already there with the coaching staff. I think there's going to be a big improvement from guys like Trevor Lawrence, guys like Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, guys like Brenton Strange, who I think really projects as somebody that could emulate the success that Cade Otton had in Tampa Bay last year. And the offensive line, if they do their due diligence and actually say what they, or I guess do what they say in terms of they want to add to the offensive line and make that better, there's a very good opportunity in front of them to actually do that. Defensively, I don't know how much they improve this year. It just depends on what they do with the guys they want to bring back or just let go. And it really depends on how they want to implement that linebacking group. If they want to have a group that is just the cleanup guys, I think they can do that. If they want to have a group that's more of the pass coverage role, I think they can do that. I think this could be one of those teams that really improves from being one of the worst teams in their division. They weren't 4th, that was Tennessee. But they could be one of those teams that has a huge, 5-6 win improvement from where they were last year. And they could make the playoffs next year after such a disappointing year in 2024. And that could lead to, Liam Cohen getting Coach of the Year possibilities, Trevor Lawrence as Comeback Player of the Year. All of these things could happen in the future. And I think it's a lot more possible now that this team succeeds in 2025 than with who they had at head coach and with the coaching staff in previous years.